Moving on, we're going to start our next panel, and it's going to be moderated by Alex Boston. Alex is the Executive Director of Renewable Cities SFU Center for Dialogue here in Canada, and they're going to be talking about something that has come up a number of times, this issue of transportation electrification. So, Alex, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us here at the Center for Dialogue. I'm the Executive Director here at Renewable Cities. This is our building here, the Center for Dialogue, and I'm glad you joined us here. I work on climate much of the time, and one of the things we try and do when we have guests joining us from around the world is we try and ensure that we have a lot of rain to reduce demand for property in the region, to better manage affordability. And I apologize that we don't have rain here for the duration of the conference, but I hope you've been able to take advantage of the beautiful weather to enjoy the seawall, the fine cuisine, many of the cultural opportunities. It's a great place, and I'm glad you're here. Renewable Cities is dedicated to renewable, resilient, and restorative cities. And we work closely with cities, but really closely with utilities as well, senior levels of government, and other players that are absolutely critical in enabling a transition to a 100% renewable future. And you are in an industry that is experiencing so much disruptive and dynamic interventions. We're going to explore today one of those disruptive interventions, and that's transportation electrification. So we're going to go on a global journey. I'm going to take a little bit of time up front to provide some of that context internationally around the world, why it's so important. Then what we're going to go to and do is visit 3 jurisdictions that are amongst the most advanced in the world in the transportation electrification journey. So we'll head down the coast to California, which is the most advanced jurisdiction in North America. We'll then zip across the Pacific Ocean to China, which is the most advanced jurisdiction in the world, and the leadership there from a policy and regulatory as well as a technology perspective will provide some very powerful lessons for everyone embarking on this journey. Then our final stop on the journey will be in the Netherlands. It has the densest EV charging infrastructure network in the world. Be prepared for the second stage in our itinerary for simultaneous translation. So channel 2, before you scramble, Anglophones, channel 2 will allow you to have translation. So one of the really powerful forces that is driving this disruptive intervention is climate change and the need to drive deep emission reductions. And the watershed report that was released last fall by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change really underscored the imperative of trying to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And it is monumental, the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius in terms of what's going to be happening on the ground in different parts of the world, whether it's sea level rise, whether it's malaria, whether it's impacts on GDP, the number of extreme heat days that are above 30 degrees Celsius on an annual basis. We are entering into an era that we haven't experienced in terms of the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere in the last million years. And that is seriously the last time we've been above 400 parts per million of CO2. Humans didn't exist. To give you a sense, the Paris commitments don't get us anywhere near 1.5. They get us around 2.6 to 3.2 degrees Celsius. And that is a really profound and rapid change in a very, very short period. And what the IPCC 1.5 degree report underscored was that we need in the order of 40 to 60% reductions by 2030, and by 2050, we're talking about net zero. This is a powerful transformation. The space that we have to enter into in the left-hand quadrant there's about 32 billion tons of carbon that are emitted in the energy sector around the world every year. The transportation space has about a quarter of those emissions. It's a space that doesn't have a lot of electricity in it. So over the next 30 years, we have to look at how much we can decarbonize, and that's predominantly in light-duty vehicles, but also some heavy. It's also shipping, it's rail, it's also, believe it or not, some air. And when we take our trip around the world, we actually will be flying on an electric airplane that operates just out of the Baerte Inlet, not far from here. The first company in the world that will have 100% electric airplanes, single prop, dual prop airplanes. They don't go more than 100 miles, so it's going to take a little bit of time to fly around the world. But bear with us and have a little bit of patience. This transformation has already begun by these leaders that we are joined with today. I see that we do not have any animation in our slides here. Let me go back a second here. Ultimately, by 2040, the projections by Bloomberg, largely based on a combination of market as well as policy forces, we're going to see in China about 70% of new EVs or new vehicle sales be EV. Europe not far behind, rest of the world hovering around 30% by 2040. And then if we, on the right-hand mystery slide, or the mystery graph, it'll be by 2040, 30% of the vehicle stock in the world will be electric, and that includes even higher penetrations in some categories. For example, in bus fleets, which are used so intensively. There's a very powerful business case. So you'll have to use your imagination here again, but we have about by 2040, 10% of current electricity demand will be for transportation sector. So this is a sector that almost has no electricity supporting mobility. There is definitely some in the public transit space and very slowly in personal vehicles, but virtually does not exist. And that's a huge transition for this industry. To give you a sense of the possibility, this is New York City, Fifth Avenue, 1900. The only there's only one vehicle that's motorized. One Model T Ford, 1900, on the street. If we move forward 13 years, same street, there's only one horse-drawn vehicle. That's how powerfully disruptive transitions can take place. I don't think we have the same level of entrenched incumbency as we did over 100 years ago, but it's very, very possible to make this transition. And we are witnessing with the various stories that we'll hear in California and China and the Netherlands that this transition is very doable, but it will take a very concerted effort. So what I want you to do is go down to Harbor Air right now and jump into one of those beautiful seaplanes that you see. Fasten your seatbelts, and we're going to go down the coast to Southern California, where we will have a tour with Paul Grigaux, and he is the Vice President of Asset Management, Strategy and Engineering in Southern California, Edison, and he oversees asset management, engineering, and system design, system planning to drive strategy and execution of company priorities. throughout transmission and distribution. And I would recommend for everybody some excellent reading, a document that he presided over. You just Google it, and it's the decarbonization and electrification agenda of Southern California Edison in both the building space and in the transportation sector. And it's an excellent vision and high-level framework of where we have to go. And this is Southern California Edison responding to very, very powerful policy drivers from the state government. So we're in Southern California, step out and jump into Tesla Model S, and that's where your journey will proceed in California. Paul.
Great. Thanks, Alex. And thank you for the opportunity to join this panel, and to the sponsoring organizations for setting up this forum. I, for one, by the way, coming from the land of sun and unfortunately wildfires these days, was looking forward to the rain. So I am disappointed that we're not getting any rain. But kidding aside, it's a beautiful city, and always enjoy being here, and especially somewhat reconnecting with my French roots as well, as I see dual languages both on TV and on the signs around here. So it's always pleasant to come back. I wanted to provide a little bit of context. I don't have slides, but I'm going to provide some numbers here to describe a little bit of Southern California Edison's profile, as well as what's happening in California that will provide the basis of some future comments I'll be making. First off, Southern California Edison is a utility that's been around for about 130 years old. That's old in the U.S., not in necessarily elsewhere, but then again, that's where we've progressed. We're made up of a number of smaller utilities, so we have a number of different standards that we are having to manage against within our own company. We are primarily a T&D company. We've gone through deregulation back in the late 90s, as many of you know. So we procure about 80+% of our power today from outside the company. Most of our power within the company is actually made up of large hydro, which does not count against our renewable portfolio standard as a company within the state of California. We have about 120,000 conductor miles of transmission distribution in our transmission distribution system. We have about 900 substations, about 5,600 feeders. From a renewables perspective, today we stand at close to 40% RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard, and close to 50% of clean carbon is being transported or distributed throughout our grid in Southern California Edison. We have about 350,000 rooftop solar panels installed by our customers. We have about 5 million meters that we serve, about 15 million residents altogether. And we have close to 200,000 EVs traveling through our service territory, which spans sort of central California all the way out to Nevada, Arizona, and down to halfway between San Diego and LA. We have a very varied topography, which adds to some complexity as well in terms of managing the system. So that's for SCE's system. We operate within California, which, as Alex indicated, is probably one of the most progressive states from a greenhouse gas policy perspective, trying to promote sort of a green agenda, which is something that residents in California feel very passionate about. And as such, there's a number of policies that have been enacted over the years, and so I'll just reference a few here just for just to get a sense as to what this means. First off, from a greenhouse gas perspective, we are today producing levels of CO2 that are equivalent to the 1990 levels after peaking something higher than that by 10%. By 2030, which is about 10 years away, we're expected to reduce that production by 40% from the 1990 levels. So that's a significant evolution here, just in 10 years from now. And then by 2050, we're expected to reduce that by 80% of the 1990 level. So that's on the greenhouse gas front. On the air quality front, interestingly enough, we, by 2032, have targeted to reduce 90% of NOx emissions from 2010 levels, which is pretty significant. In fact, air pollution is probably the biggest challenge within Southern California, despite all the significant advances that have been made over the past couple of decades in our state. Southern California, specifically the LA Basin, is the only basin in the United States that is deemed severe non-attainment by the EPA, which means that it's below breathing or safe breathing air standards, so to speak. I'm probably not saying it exactly right, but a scary stat nevertheless, despite the fact that there's been some significant improvements there. And what's interesting out of all this is the transportation sector contributes 80% of NOx emissions within Southern California, and half of that comes from heavy-duty vehicles and long-haul vehicles. So lots of opportunity here just by touching the transportation sector. Another interesting stat, I think Alex, you referenced that 25% of transportation contributes to the greenhouse gases, if I recall correctly. For us in Southern California, it's 40% of the greenhouse gases come from the transportation sector. So we have, as Alex indicated, we have published 2 years ago a white paper to address the policy objectives. By the way, I'll reference a couple more things before I go there because I think they're interesting as well. We have a renewable portfolio standard, a commitment to reach 33% by 2020. We're at 40% today in Southern California, Edison, and then 60% by 2030. And then from a clean, carbon-free generation perspective, we have a target of reaching 40% by, 50% by 2030, and I believe it's 100% by 2045. So it's 80%, excuse me, by 2030 and 100% by 2045. So very aggressive. We have published, as Alex indicated, a clean power and electrification pathway, essentially a roadmap on how we're going to get there. We're calling for 7 million vehicles, EVs, 25% of our population of vehicles in California by 2030. That's, again, just 10 years away, and right now we stand at about 600,000 in California. So needless to say, a very, very aggressive roadmap for Southern California Edison and for the other 2 IOUs, for the whole state for that matter, and lots of work ahead of us, but we're excited and looking forward to the challenge. And we believe that IOUs, electric utilities, play an instrumental role in facilitating that transformation.
Great, thank you very much. It's interesting that the drivers for this transition definitely are different from one jurisdiction to another, and Paul underscored the co-benefit of air quality. In fact, that is the primary driver in some jurisdictions, notably in China. So I want you to get out of your Tesla Model S, jump back in that Harbor Air float plane, suspend belief for a second because it's going to take a while because the range is only about 100 miles. So we're going to island hop, come back up the coast and cross to China, and then we're going to land in Beijing. And Jincang Niu is the vice president of Straight Grid EV Service. It's a subsidiary of Straight Grid Corporation of China, and it is responsible for the construction and operation of State Grid's Smart Internet of Vehicles platform, which is an award-winning platform recognized by Edison Electric just last year. They also operate EV rental and sales and the operation of new energy and energy storage services. The vehicle that you're going to be jumping into when you get out of your aircraft is going to be an electric bus. There's 400,000 of them on the road in China, most of them in Straight Grid's service area. And to give you a sense of the volume of buses, that's basically 1 in every 2 buses in the United States already electrified. So thank you so much for in advance for sharing your wisdom with us, Jincang. And Channel 2, everybody for translation.
好，谢谢 Alex。大家上午好哈，我来自中国，
I'm
很
from
荣幸
China.
啊，能够在我们这个美丽的城市。
I'm very honored to be in this beautiful city
首
to be
先呢，我
with
介绍
you
一
to
下中
attend
国
this
在
forum. First
充
of
电
all,
设施建设方面的
I would
一
like
些
to
背
brief
景
you
和
about
政
the
策。
background of the
这几年来
charging
呢，国家针
infrastructure
对
in
充
China in
电
the
行
past
业
years,
各个环节呢，
targeting the
出台了
various
多项的
steps
鼓励
of
政策
the， charging industry.
覆盖了充电设施
Lots
的
of
规划、建设用
policy
地、
incentives
建设运营的
are
奖励，
being put in
以及
place,
电力的接入、
including
电价、
construction land, construction and
设施
operation
的建设和运
incentives,
营，以及
power
充电
grid
的标
access
准
as well as
和互联互
tariffs,
通多个方
infrastructure,
面，
construction and operational,
有
as
力
well
地
as the
引导
charging
了
standards
充电市场
and
的发展。
interconnection, which
我们的
greatly
各个地方
facilitated the
政府呢，
development of the
也
charging
纷纷出
market,
台了
and local
相关的
governments
建设目
also
标
came up
以
with
及
their
保证措施，
own construction
并通过制
targets
定一
as
些
well
地
as
方性的补贴
guarantee measures
以及
through
服
some
务费
local
的上
incentive
限
subsidies as
建
well
设
as
审批
ceiling, tariff
等
ceilings
政策的细则
and
落
approval,
实
land approval
对充电设施建设
detailed
各个方面
policies.
的
It
规划，
really honored
对于
the
调动全
policy
社
from
会
the
相
central
关资源，
government, which mobilized
促进我们
social
充电设
resources.
施的建设，
So
发挥了
as
非
to
常
push
关
forward
键的作用。
the development of
在各方
infrastructure
面政策的指
for
导下，
charging
我们国
services.
家
Guided
正在
by those
建设
policies,
覆盖
the
城市
government
公共领域、
China is trying to
高速
build
公
up
路
a
沿
charging
线、
service network that
私
covers
人的一
public,
些小区
urban public
以及一
area,
些企事业单位
highway,
的内部
along
长远的
highway
充电网络。
backbone lines, as well
根据统
as
计呢，截止
communities.
到今年的6
According
月份，
to statistics
我国
by
新能源汽车的
June
保
of
有
this
量已
year,
经达
we
到了
already have
344
3.44
万辆，
million
其中呢，
EVs on
纯
the
电
road.
的车呢也接近了
Pure
300万辆，
EV is close to 3
与我们
million.
18年底
Compared to the
相
end
比
of
增加了
2018,
83
it
万
was
辆，
up by
同比增长了
850,000
31.87%。
vehicles, up by 31.87%.
充
Charging
的保有量
infrastructure
也达到了100万辆，
already reached 1 million compared to the end of last year, up by 28.9%.
应该说全国的充电设
It can be
施
said
也
that
持续地改善。
the national charging
预计到
facilities have been
2020年底
improving. It is estimated
新增
that by the end
集
of
中式的充电站
2020, the
将
newly
超过
increased
1.2万个，
centralized charging stations
分
will
散
be
式
more
的
than
充电桩
12,000
将超过
and
480万个。
distributed charging piles will be more
应该
than
说
4.8
能够满
million.
足我们500万辆电动汽
So
车的
that
充
will
电
be
需求。
enough to meet the 5 million
目
EV
前呢，我
need.
们中国的电动汽车产业
At
也
the
进入了
moment,
加速
the
发展
EV
阶段，
manufacturing industry is
市场
also
总体
speeding
发
up.
展形势比较好
The，market is very
也为我
stable.
们充电设施的建设呢
It also brings unprecedented opportunities for
那么
charging
我们公司呢
infrastructure.
主要开展的
For our company, this is the work we did. First of all, we set up the charging service network, including high-speed rapid charging as well as urban rapid charging
还有
network
我们一些家庭的
and some
共用的充电桩。
family-based
主要分布
shared
在
charging
我们
piles.
的
Mostly,
中东部地区，
they are distributed across east as well as some important tier 1 cities in western China
充电桩
with
8.8万个，主要是
11,000 power
我们的
charging stations
公共的
established
快充
and 88,000 charging piles
覆盖了26
covering
个省、
26
273
provinces,
个城市，
273
形成了全
cities,
国的一张网，
which
和
formed a
10
national
纵
network
横
as well as 10
2环的
horizontal
高
and
速公路的
10
充电网络。
verticals and 2 ring highway rapid charging network with an average distance between of less than 50 kilometers.
建立了中国的
Well, at the same time, we also set up our own charging facility standards system. Basically, we set up 22
与美国标准、日本标准、
national standards and 27 industry standards and 61 enterprise standards compared to against US and Japan and Europe standards. We became one of the 4 important standard system. We also set up the smart connected vehicles platform so as to really honor the technologies of cloud computing, AI, big data, and energy services. So that the rental and sales of EVs as well as the comprehensive services provided to the industry, they are all digitized. By the end of July, the registered users of this platform is 2.75 million, with 312,000 charging piles connected. Among them, the state grid company also set up a full subsidiary by the end of 2015, which is the EV service company. The subsidiary is mostly charged with the responsibility of providing green mobility as well as to really push and facilitate the development of the EV industry in China so as to provide great services for manufacturers, battery manufacturers, and battery manufacturers, government, as well as users. We focus on platform construction establishment. We want to focus on mobility, charging, and transportation. We cover all the areas covered by the national, by the state grid, focusing on Western provincial capital cities in Western China as well as Mid and Eastern China. We want to research into new technologies and to achieve technological breakthroughs. In 2019, we set up a 50,000 pilot projects. It is estimated that by the end of 2020, the newly increased charging capacity will be 300 million kWh, and we also had an automatic seamless payment process. We also push forward the data collection of individual charging business, individual vehicle charging business. We also came up with various utilization scenarios so as to incentivize the users of EVs to really get actively involved into various diversified commercialized service model, relying on the customer service provided by State Grid. We provide very quick response maintenance and repair services, both offline and online. We also increase access to social operators into our platform. We also build up various service platforms, mostly around the Three Gorges Dam, the 16 docks, and a dozen of other anchorages connection to our platform. In 2019, our transaction volume is 2 billion kWh. Together with major private operators, we set up JVs to resolve the interconnection of charging facilities, and we also have upstream and downstream cooperation so as to further tap into the potential of the market and also to provide better services to the market and to really build up an ecosystem for EV. I have two insights to share. The first is that the new EV interactive facilities interconnection into the state grid actually put high demand on the state grid network, and the second is that adequately competitive market. We need to provide high quality services so as to meet the need of the customers and the industry, to really focus on the pain points, for example, inconvenience in charging as well as mileage restrictions perceived by the customers, to improve customer satisfaction, to make sure that it's more convenient to charge your car than to fill up your car. Here ends my report. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Niu. That very insightful. And I think looking at some of the questions, we're going to go back and hear from you again. So step out of your electric bus, get back on board that little single prop electric plane, and we're going to head to the Netherlands. And we're going to land at the headquarters of ELAD NL, ELAD Netherlands. And what they are is the knowledge and innovation hub for all of the distributers and the transmission companies in the Netherlands. And Baerte de Brey there is the Chief International Officer, and he's been working in the e-mobility space for over a decade with his own DSO that he represents around the table at ELAD Netherlands. And he's played a really important role in establishing standards that have been adopted across the Netherlands, but are being adopted by other jurisdictions around the world. And in his time when he's not in his own utility or working with ELAD, he's actually an elected official with the province of Utrecht, if I recall. And when you stepped out onto the curb there, you're going to make your journey around the Netherlands in an electric shared car. It's a car to go. I think it's a Mercedes, isn't that right? All brands, okay. So thank you very much, Baerte, for joining us here in Vancouver.
Thank you very much. May I have the pointer for the slides? Yeah, I have some slides. Title is Vehicle to Grid. Not really vehicle to grid, but vehicle is grid, because from the start, 10 years ago, we tried to integrate e-mobility as a part of the grid. So the car becomes a buffer for the grid. Some perspective, in 2030, this is national policy, 2030, we want to have all new sold personal cars to be electric. The total bus fleet for public transportation should be 100% electric. And actually ambitious goals, but we're on target. Roughly 180,000 electric vehicles at this moment. 10% of new sold cars have a plug. We're rolling out a big network of charging stations. We have over 150,000 public and semi-public chargers, 1,500 fast charging stations. So we're heading there, and of course the big driver are climate goals. But if this is for the national government, but a thing which wasn't mentioned by Alex, this was a front page of our newspaper in the Netherlands yesterday. 20% of our youth have asthma because of NOxes. So a total different approach from local governments. The kids are getting sick, really sick. Cities are closed with emission zones, both for the climate, but mostly for better air quality. And the success of this rollout is collaboration. What we do is, from the top, work together with energy suppliers, charge point operators, engineering companies, because you have to build the charging network, consumer platforms, very important, the car manufacturers, not only by buying the cars, but they have to build different type of electric cars, not only diesel drivetrain out, battery in, but they have to make a car which is also a component of the grid. And in the end, of course, us, the DSOs and the TSOs for supplying all the energy provided, because mentioned by James Robb, from central generation, we're heading to a totally different market. The Netherlands had houses heated by gas in the past, but we want to have 100% electric neighborhoods, electric cities in a few years. We have our own gas fields, but we pumped out so much gas the past years that now we have earthquakes. So we stopped mining for the gas. Now we have to import it from Russia. Not an optimal situation at this moment. So we're electrifying the heating as well. However, this will give us a tremendous demand peak in winter times, roughly at the same time when people get home and want to charge their car. On the other hand, we'll have a huge supply peak during summer because of rooftop solar. At this moment, increase of rooftop solar is 94% per year, so it almost doubles. And, well, we can't double the grid investments in a year. So we have to do it on a smarter way, balance the grid, and here comes the car in. If you can buffer the grid, so charge the car when you have a peak supply of sun, or you can do vehicle to grid in winter times when you need extra capacity for heating the houses, you might solve the problem. However, you solve congestion on the DSO grids in one neighborhood, but you create unbalanced load for the TSO. So when you stop charging or start charging in one neighborhood, you should do the opposite somewhere else in another city. And this is where good DSO-TSO collaboration is essential. But for the rollout, back to the national plans, major ambitions, we do this together. So we have identified all our hubs in the grid and have identified what the plans of local communities are, where the AC chargers will be for public charging, but also for bus depots and all that. So we can have a big major plan for 5 and 10 years in a rollout, so that becomes a smooth and efficient process. And because it's so smooth and efficient and not one charger at a time, but neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood, installation costs will drop and the business case also becomes much better. Economy of scales is reached, and for this we got help from municipalities such as Utrecht, who does big public tenders. So on the one hand, economies of scales. On the other hand, the first appendix of the big tenders are the technical specs by the DSOs. So we don't are unaware of or surprised of the winner of a tender who has specifically gear installed. No, they have to apply with specifications set by the DSO and the TSO on quality and installation, for example. And very important for us, 100% smart charging infrastructure. So we can do the balancing. And Utrecht is the first city in the world, excuse me for the Dutch, but the big headline is Utrecht the first city in the world for a 2000 tender of charging infrastructure able for vehicle to grid. Interoperability is very important for customer convenience, so you can charge with one identification card all over the Netherlands. So that's the software, but also the hardware for buses. Here you see some buses when the pantograph goes up, but in the market there's also bus companies who have a pantograph from charging infrastructure going down. Well, that's child diseases which we have to overcome at this moment. Very important for us, power quality. We identified, of course, some voltage issues if you go charging on a very large scale, but also the harmonics and the supraharmonics, so the very high frequencies. If you have one car, that isn't a very big problem, but on a very large penetration scale, it multiplies, and not only on the DSO grids, but transformers are so efficient these days. The supraharmonics add on to the TSO grid. And the idea we now have is develop the cars together with the automotive industry so you avoid this problem. But this is where the European Commission comes in, and we must collaborate also with American governments, American manufacturers, manufacturers from China and Japan to have cars who are not only good in driving electric, but also very good in charging electric. So, interoperability is a very important issue to be solved, power quality issues, and have a vision on integrating e-mobility into the grid so the vehicle becomes a part of the grid. And for that, you need smart charging. We need a little bit of help from the governments for a new set of regulations in the Netherlands, by local governments and national governments in Europe. But I think we should do this together from Asia, from America and Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our panel for sharing their wisdom. There are lots of questions that are coming up. I'm going to pose one right away because it's really important and exists across. It's one of the most defining characteristics of these leading jurisdictions. It's probably most advanced in China and in the Netherlands, is really good governance and strong networks that exist amongst all of these diverse players that have an important role to play in this space. And it's new players that haven't collaborated with one another before, and the importance of bringing them around the table. And I'm wondering if, Baerte, you could comment on the world's strongest Formula E team.
Yeah, we just rebranded it because we founded the Formula E team 10 years ago as a collaboration. I should this slide, collaboration of government, engineers, grid operators, car manufacturers, consumer platforms. However, there also became a race, the Formula E. So now it's Holland e-mobility. And it was founded by the government, the Minister of Economic Affairs and the Minister of Infrastructure. So that's where it's embedded. We like to drink beer a lot in the Netherlands. So we organize roughly monthly drinking parties. And it's very efficient to have meetings in front of the drinking parties. And that way we set not only the very ambitious policy goals by the national government, but you see each other roughly 10 times a year, and you are talking to each other how to make the milestones and reach the milestones. And you see, you can't do it alone just by the grid operators installing a lot of charging infrastructure. You need the building permits by the local government, or you need the cars to be new and innovative. And meeting each other on a very regular basis with a push with ambitious goals from the government, that's part of the success, I think.
And you'll find this in other important spaces, driving deep emission reductions in buildings. Similarly, new governance regimes are absolutely essential where different players are working with one another. This jurisdiction here in British Columbia has essentially a Formula E team for a net zero building code. And it's one of the reasons that we are moving very rapidly towards net zero by 2032. One of the big questions that is being raised is research priorities by government, by academia. I'm going to open that up to Mr. Yu and also to Paul. What are your perspectives on the big research priorities?
Thanks, Alex. There's, we have through the California Public Utilities Commission an EPIC program that effectively is funded by customers to enable research in a variety of spaces. A couple of areas right now that are very critical for us is in fact what Baerte has been talking about, which is a vehicle-to-grid onboard inverter. There are some challenges within California and lots of rules about how to interconnect into the grid. And the challenge with EVs is that you have essentially a mobile battery storage and you don't know where it's going to interconnect at any point in time. And so the current rules that we have in place don't actually enable that. We also have some communication protocol challenges still that we need to work through in terms of standards and so on. So that's a very big area for us that we're working in. Another area that I would maybe just reference here is the transit system. So similar to what I think Mr. News referenced in terms of the buses in China, we have an order of magnitude smaller number of buses in California, with about 12,000 or so, if I recall correctly, buses in California, and we have a policy objective of electrifying or transforming those buses zero emissions by 2040, I believe. And so we are engaging in a very aggressive campaign in Southern California. We're working with LA Metro and Foothill and a variety of other communities to figure out a way to best electrify those buses. And so it's an interesting it's an interesting challenge in terms of the use of the buses and when they're on the road and how to best manage the charging so that it optimizes the use of the grid as Baerte has described earlier. So those are a couple of research areas that we're pursuing.
这个我们关心的呢，一个是我们一边和电网有关系，另一侧呢要服务我们的电动汽车客户。那么大量的电动车应用以后，我们的电网如何和汽车、电动车之间去互动、去交流？为一方面为我们的电网这一侧能够安全稳定的运行。
Grid side, we have to ensure reliability and security. On the other hand, we have to provide quality services to the customers. And I think that is an area we are focused on. And secondly, we study different scenarios to guide the layout of our charging facilities. For example, the dedicated fleet, like a public bus, logistics vehicles, transport, and public facilities layout, we have to have dedicated research.
Bart, do you have a...
Yeah, a small comment or addition. A collaboration, for example, in the rollout is from demand-driven, that consumers go to a municipality, ask for one charging station, or a bus company does one depot. We try together with the universities build a model and predict where the new customers will be, so we can do a larger rollout, and for engineering that becomes much more efficient from driving out in the morning for just one charging station, or do a batch of 10, 50, 100 in a week. So it's plannable, cost reduction, more consumer satisfaction. But you need a model by a university or an expensive consultancy firm.
And driving down the cost of deployment is such an imperative. And I'm going to actually pose a question to China, because it seems so sophisticated, and understanding the different business models that exist in different, let's say, archetypes. So high density areas that are not residential, then the residential context, highways, fast charging highways, which are not very profitable, and so in those situations they tend to be rate based. But I'm wondering if Mr. Niu, if you can talk about some of the business models that exist in China, so there's a deeper appreciation of the diversity of regulatory change that's required to cost effectively roll out infrastructure.
好，谢谢啊。在中国的布局哈，
In China,
有几类的场所。
we have several spaces.
相当于我们的公共充电。
First is a public charging
尤其是在
service,
我们的高速公路的布局，
especially in the initial stage of our highway layout. The business model was unclear. The major purpose was to ease the concerns of long-distance travel of customers, and it's hard to calculate return on investment. And for the private mobility, our layout strategy or business model is considering they spend most of their time in their private space, so where conditions permit, for every personal EV, we install a convenient AV small power, like a 7,000 watt charging facility in their community or residential neighborhood to meet their mobility demand.
麻烦的。 我们也建立了一些提供普遍服务的大功率的充电设施，基本上是半个小时左右能够提供80%的电量。
They will provide 80% of the power supply.
通过这样的布局呢，能够
Through such a deployment, it will help guide our EV users to really relieve their anxiety regarding mobility and traveling. Actually, in the during the primary stage of EV development, I think that's quite necessary. Those parts should complement each other.
Thank you very much. There's a very popular question on heavy-duty, long-distance freight posed to you, Paul. What are the challenges and opportunities in this space?
Yeah, so it's probably our least mature space right now in our e-mobility strategy. But it's one that we've recently, first off, gotten approval from our commission, which was a big deal. We got about a $356 million, if I recall correctly, filing that was approved to deploy what we call our charge-ready transport program, which is to work with transportation companies, transit authorities amongst them, to really facilitate the deployment of infrastructure beyond the customer meter, by the way, which is really very unique, at least for us in California, to begin to build infrastructure all the way up to the charge point, and in some cases even the chargers, if it makes sense and if it would help, accelerate and build sort of the network that we need to build out to facilitate the transformation of those heavy-duty vehicles. From a long-haul perspective, we're even further away there, although this funding that I just referenced, which will be deployed over the course of the next 4 years, will also support that. Our preliminary assessment is indicating that for long hauls, which, by the way, in California is significant. As an aside, 40% of the goods movement in the U.S. come from the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and how they are transported out of the port is through long-haul trucking, and they happen to traverse corridors that are typically disadvantaged communities. So it contributes to the NOx issue that I referred to earlier. That is a real problem and very personal to us to address. So we're very motivated to see if we can help transform that profile. And so we are exploring right now what this could mean for us, but our preliminary assessment to facilitate these long-haul trucking needs that we're anticipating is that we're looking at building charging stations probably in the order of 10 to 20 megawatts, which will require a significant upgrade of our transmission and distribution system, building substations which as for those of us that have lived in California, can take anywhere from 7 to 10 years in today's model. So we're going to need a real transformation in how we're thinking about solving this problem. And so one of the things we are also actively pursuing and researching in is the dual use of fast charging DC stations along with batteries, so that we can minimize the impact on the grid and be a lot more strategic about how we can facilitate fast charging at very high rates.
Thank you, Paul. We'll have one last question. There are a lot of questions regarding managing and optimizing the grid, including using EVs as an asset. And if Mr. New, you'd be able to comment on that as well, supplementing anything that you didn't comment on in your remarks, and Baerte as well. You did comment on it, but if there's anything that you'd like to add, because it's a popular question.
其实这是这个和电网的协调关系啊。
Actually,
也是我们
the
电网
coordination
系统
with the state
特别
grid
关心的一个问题。
it's also a big focus
尤
for
其
the
是
state
大量
grid,
应用以后，
especially
因为
for
这个
large
是
scale
我
deployment,
们
because
公司在大力在推在做的一个
this
事
is
情。
what our
在
company
这个
has
协
been
调上，我觉
focusing
得
on in terms of
如
coordination.
何我们大量的
How
这
can
种电
we
动车的推广，
really
刚才像
upscale the volume
我们
of
荷兰女
EV?
士
How
说
can we do it in an
和电
orderly
网进行
way?
交互
How
这
can we
些方面
interact
呢
with the
有非
state
常细致的东西去
grid
做。
in
但
a
是它
beneficial
不
way?
是
There are lots of
比如说我
details
大量
involved. For example, at
这个
what
电动
level
车
do you
应该
interact?
社区。
Large
那么我
EVs
和
are
我
in
们的
private,
配电设
like
施和
residential
它的变电
communities,
器和它的上
and
级
the
网络
transformer as
如
well
何去
as
协调
the
对这个用户态
all
度
that converter, like
我
how
们以
it
后
is going to
估计
interact
再
with
过
the
10
upstream
年20
network,
年
because there are so
中国的电动
many
汽车有
users,
可能达
and
到
in
上亿
10,
辆
20 years we may have
如何去
100 more
控制
than
如何去
hundreds of
协调
millions of
这是一个
EVs.
非常头疼的
How
问题
can we
需要
control
我
and
们现
coordinate
在
that?
加
It's
紧去研究
indeed a pain point. And when our
它对
response is to speed
是有
up
一定的影
research
响
because
我们如何去
for sure it's
管理
going
好
to impact
去
our
服务
state
好
grid. How can
这
we
对我们来
manage
说
it better and serve
是
it
一个
better?
挑战
That's a
谢谢
big test for us.
Yeah, this is a whole new territory. As I mentioned, it isn't only diesel drivetrain out and electric drivetrain in. We see that there might be a new business case, a totally new business case, not only selling the car for e-mobility purposes, but car sharing comes in, and the total cost of ownership for a car sharing company or a normal consumer who can also benefit from grid services, this might reduce the total cost of ownership, and totally new business models might evolve. We're doing some tests with some of the organizations behind this to see what is applicable. But for example, as a DSO, we're now linking with payment services or car reservation organizations with whom we never dealt before. But if we know what the reservations of a car, of a shared car are, we can predict what they are going to consume and charge at a certain location. And on the other hand, when they're not used and parked, and when we can use the battery as a storage. So totally new partners whom we don't know at the moment yet.
I see we're at time, and I know there's a few other questions, and I'd really encourage those of you who have your questions, and there's some very good ones here, to come up and join us right here and be able to respond to them individually. Thank you so much to our panelists for driving us around their various jurisdictions to give us insights into how they've been able to take their jurisdictions forward on transportation electrification. Thank you so much for your interest, and I wish you well in driving into your future in your preferred electric vehicle, autonomous potentially, who knows what. Thank you to our translators. Very tough task, very commendably done. And thank you so much to Edison Electric Institute. You've done a really commendable job programming and in a very unique and supportive way bringing this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Alex, for that. We're going to have a networking break from now until 11:05. So be exact, we'll have 30 minutes of networking break. We'll get back in 11:05 for our next panel. So.